The only thing we have as writers to convey emotion are our words. So today we're going to talk about words and language and how important they are to help you create that emotion that you want in your novel. Welcome to the Julia Amante channel. If we're just meeting, I am Julia Amante, a women's fiction author. So let's talk about language in conveying emotion. So the words that we choose are going to have an effect on the reader, right? So we have to be careful with the language that we use. So one of the things that you want to avoid is cliches, okay? So cliches have absolutely no effect on the reader because they've heard it so many times. So what happens with cliches is the more we hear them, the reason we have cliches is because they're true, right, or they work, but they stop working after a while because we've heard them and heard them and heard them and heard them and heard them. So when we hear, looking for a needle in a haystack, yeah, we understand what it means, but we've heard it so many times, it's really not fresh, and we don't really connect with it, and we have no emotion. We just understand what the person is saying. But with novels, right, we want fresh language. We want the language to make an impact on the reader. And so we want to avoid this. So anytime that you're using a cliche, and it doesn't have to be just that kind of cliche, it can be a cliche that we see all the time. Like one of the ones that I'm guilty of, and most romance writers tend to be guilty of, is when the hero is frustrated. He runs his fingers through his hair, okay? He's frustrated, he's like, okay, so he runs his finger through his hair. And this is because, again, we've seen people do this. We've seen people, when they get frustrated, that's what they do. So, but by writing that, the reader will make a connection because they've seen it before, but it's not fresh. So one of the things you want to do is think of a different way of saying that, or using language and words that are different, that will connect, that the reader can connect with, to, and also like it, right? Like the language. Like one of the reasons that we read is because we love words, and we love to see things, an expression in a different way, or have similes and metaphors that we haven't heard before. I don't know if you've ever had the experience where you're reading something, you're like, oh, that was said so beautifully. I really love the way that this author wrote this, or explained this emotion. It was so clear. So when you are explaining emotions or frustrations or any of those things, what you want to do is if you write the cliche down, if you want to just get it down and then, circle it or highlight it or do something, and then come back to it when you're revising and think of a fresh way to say it. Say it differently so that it is, again, it's new and refreshing to your reader, and it's not something just dead words that they've heard a million times that don't mean anything to them anymore. So one of the things, again, is just to make sure that you are using language in a way that's going to help you. Also think that that words themselves have meaning. So they have connotations, right? So let's think of the word, for example, house. Okay, so maybe the character has gone on a trip, and the character is returning to their house, and they're going to come inside and, unpack. Okay? What feeling does that give you, that they're returning to their house? Well, that they're returning to a building. It really doesn't. It has no feeling to it. If we say home, the character is returning home, it has a different connotation. When we think of our home, it has a warmer feeling, right? It has a feeling of a place where we belong, a place where we're comfortable, a place where we want to be, right? So we're returning home. Again, in my novel, there's a huge thing with this because of her, my main character, like I mentioned last time, is returning home and has sort of an uneasy relationship with actually both of her parents. And people keep saying, welcome home, because she's coming to her little hometown. And she keeps thinking and saying that this is mom's home, it's not my home, because she doesn't feel that warmth and happiness that a home is supposed to have. So So think of the words that you use, and then how can you maybe change the words to give it the connotation that you want, that you want to have, and you want the reader to feel. So, and depending on the kind of genre that you're writing and the kind of stories that you're writing, you also want to use language that matches, right? So if you're writing a romantic comedy, the language that you're going to use is going to be light. It's going to be not going to have dark room. There's not going to be a lot of darkness connected to it. Where if you're writing a horror novel, or you're writing a dark, maybe a suspenseful novel, you're going to use images and language that is dark and shadowy, and that kind of vocabulary that is going to match the type of book that you're writing. So not only because of language, but because that creates the emotion, and that's what we're talking about, right? What we're thinking is, how are we going to create this emotion? If I want my character to feel, if I want my reader to feel fear, or I want my reader to feel uneasiness, I need to use language that is going to make my reader feel that way. Okay, so I'm going to share just the opening of an older book that I have of Dean Koontz. It's called Lightning. And I want you to kind of see the emotion that you feel just at the very beginning of this book, because you can tell by the language that he uses, right? The type of story. Even if you didn't know what kind of writer he is, you get the emotion and the feeling from his words, and you understand. You actually know the genre immediately, right? Okay, so a storm struck on the night Laura Shane was born, and there was a strangeness about the weather that people would remember for years. Wednesday, January 12, 1955, was frigid, gray, and somber. At twilight, thick, fluffy snowflakes spiraled out of the low sky, and the people of Denver huddled in expectation of the Rocky Mountain blizzard. By 10 o'clock that night, a bitterly cold gale blew in from the west, howling out of the mountain passes and shrieking down those rugged wooded slopes. The snowflakes grew smaller until they were as fine as sand, and they sounded as abrasive as sand too. And the wind blew them across the windows of Dr. Paul Maxwell's book-lined study. Okay, so the language that he's using here, right? The bitterly cold gale, the gray, frigid, gray, somber. All of those, that language is telling you, right? It's a dark story. It's going to be, this isn't a happy, a happy romance. This isn't a comedy. This is going to be dark. There's a storm. There's a blizzard, and immediately it puts us into that. Hold on, I don't want that book to fall. It puts us into the feeling that the writer wants us to have, right? He wants us to have this sort of uneasy, feel the darkness, feel the heaviness of the cold, all of that, right? The gray. So he does a great job by using language, and that's what you need to do. And then often this is not something that unless you're brilliant, I'm not, but it doesn't usually happen in the first draft. As I'm writing, I'm just trying to really get the story down, and I'm getting some of the emotion down, but I'm not getting the language just right. But when I go through the second time, that's one of the things that I want to look at is, can I change the vocabulary? Can I change the language to make it more impactful, to create the emotion that I want from the reader? Can I describe things in a certain way that it's going to have that effect that I'm looking for? Okay, so think about language, think about vocabulary, think about the connotations of words, think about not using cliches, how to make your writing fresh, so that you can reach your reader not only on the level of preparing them, as we talked about, not only on the level of actually the plot and the things that are happening in the story, but also on the level of the language, which is more subtle, but they may not even recognize that you are creating the emotion in them by the words that you choose, but you are, okay? Same thing as with movies. If you think of movies, what are they doing? They're using lighting, they're using sound and music to the setting to create the emotion that they want you to have. We don't have all that. All we have are our words. We don't have the music. We do have setting, and we will talk about that. But we do have the words, right? So if we choose our words carefully and just carefully and with intention, then we're going to have a better chance of creating the emotion that we want in the reader. The other thing that I want to add today, not only have you think about language, but I also want you to think about props. And this is kind of interesting, right? So what, again, looking at movies, right? They have the sound, they have lighting, they have all this stuff, and they also have props. Like they use things to bring emotions or to reveal emotion in the characters. And we do this in books as well. At least, if you are a writer who thinks about this, and you guys are, and you will be, right? If you're not already, is using props. So maybe like the character does. So maybe the character used to be a smoker and is no longer a smoker, but every time that the character gets frustrated or nervous or whatever, she picks up a cigarette, and maybe she only holds it, or maybe she actually smokes it, and that reveals to us, right, that she's having a difficult time here. She can't, she's not dealing well with her frustration. So that could be a prop, but there could be all kinds of props, things that happen that let us know how the character feels. Maybe every time the character walks into a certain room or goes to a bar or whatever and acts a certain way, we use that thing as a prop. So the prop could be the setting, the place where they go. It could be a thing. It could be an animal, right? So maybe we have, which is kind of cool. Sometimes I have seen this done, where somebody has an animal like a grouchy cat that matches sort of the personality of the character, right? So this prop tells us about the personality of the character. So that it could even be something like that. But using props to show emotion. Maybe the character is lonely and has had a loss in his life, and so he has like these favorite lucky shoes that every time that he's missing this person, he puts on his lucky shoes and he goes for a run. So there's all kinds of stuff you could do. But remember that and think about that. What kind of props could you use to show emotion, to show agony, to show, all the various emotions that we tend to have. We tend to just think of emotion as being happy or being sad or being angry. But there are so many emotions that we tend to have. We aren't always happy. Sometimes we're ecstatic, or sometimes we're just slightly amused. And so how can we use these different props to help us to show the reader the emotion? So kind of think of that too. Okay, so I hope that this is helpful. I hope that you liked it. Please hit the like button, and then join me next Friday, and we'll continue to talk about how to bring out emotion in your reader.